In Eni oggi coltiviamo delle microalghe che catturano anidride carbonica. Ma non basta. Abbiamo bisogno di Lorenzo, che riutilizza gli oggetti per creare qualcosa di nuovo. Eni più Lorenzo è meglio di Eni. Insieme abbiamo un'altra energia. In Eni oggi coltiviamo delle microalghe che catturano anidride carbonica. Ma non basta. Abbiamo bisogno di Lorenzo, che riutilizza gli oggetti per creare qualcosa di nuovo. Eni più Lorenzo è meglio di Eni. Insieme abbiamo un'altra energia.
Benvenuti.
Welcome. Welcome to the special edition of the Rimini Meeting 2020. Welcome to all of you who are here present at the Palacongressi of Rimini. I welcome the authorities and all of you who are connected from Italy and abroad. I welcome all of you who are in more 130 squares all over Italy and in 25 countries from all over the world. It was so surprising to see such a passionate interest from all over the world. And 5 continents are connected. Nobody was expecting that. So we are more aware and grateful to be the mating for friendship amongst peoples. And a special welcome to you, Professor Draghi. Thank you very, very much for accepting our invitation. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and views at the beginning of this very special meeting. It is very special because it occurs in the middle of an unexpected, devastating crisis that it's still hard to define. However, a crisis contains the seeds of opportunity, the opportunity to rediscover ourselves in a new, deeper way, in a more authentic way. And there's also the opportunity to discover and rediscover the meaning of our relations, the meaning of work, the meaning of education. On top of that, we have the opportunity to discover new ways for the social, economic, and political life. These are the reasons why we decided to carry out, in spite of the difficult times we're going through, a special edition of the meeting. We really want to understand what really matters and counts in life. We want to understand what let us hope and create and undertake and build in life. The title of this year's meeting, Devoid of Wonder, We Remain Deaf to the Sublime, is an invitation to look at ourselves and at the world with renewed gratitude and with authentic curiosity, without any calculations and without any form of cynicism. And we are persuaded that only such a gaze will make us able to find new solutions for the problems we're going to face. We are deeply grateful to the Holy Father, Pope Francis, that once again this year shows us his closeness and proximity with a message that delves into the title of this year's meeting. And I'm going to read this precious message that comes from the Secretary of State of His Holiness, the Cardinal Pietro Parolin, through the Bishop of Rimini, Monsignor Francesco Lambiasi. Your Reverend Excellency, the Holy Father wishes to convey through you his wishes for the success of the 41st meeting for friendship amongst peoples, which will primarily take place in a virtual forum. To the organizers and all those who will participate, Pope Francis assures his closeness and his prayer. Who has not felt closer to others in this dramatic time of the pandemic? We have realized that we are on the same boat, all of us, fragile and disoriented. The storm exposes our vulnerability and uncovers those false and superfluous certainties around which we have constructed our daily schedules, our projects, our habits and priorities. It shows us how we have allowed to become dull and feeble, the very things that nourish, sustain and strengthen our lives. The theme of this year's meeting, Devoid of Wonder, We Remain Deaf to the Sublime, offers a precious and original contribution at a dizzying moment in history. In seeking material goods instead of the good, many have focused exclusively on their own strengths, on their ability to produce and to earn, rejecting the attitude which makes up the child's gaze on reality, wonder, and astonishment. Commenting on this, Chesterton wrote, "The most unfathomable schools and sages have never attained to the gravity which dwells in the eyes of a baby of 3 months old." It is the gravity of astonishment at the universe, and astonishment at the universe is not mysticism, but a transcendent common sense. This brings to mind Jesus' invitation to become like children, as well as the wonder in front of being, which was the basis of philosophy in ancient Greece. It is this amazement that sets life in motion, allowing it to start again in any circumstance. Amazement is what we should feel, for life is a gift that constantly gives us a chance to make a new start, Pope Francis said, going on to reiterate the necessity of being renewed in wonder in order to live. Without amazement, life becomes dull and routine, and so it is with faith. The Church, too, needs to renew her amazement at being the dwelling place of the living God, the bride of the Lord, a mother who gives birth to her children. In recent months, we have experienced that dimension of amazement that takes the form of compassion in the presence of suffering, fragility, and the precariousness of existence. This noble human feeling pushed doctors and nurses to face the severe challenge of coronavirus with extreme dedication and admirable effort. That same feeling, full of affection for those students, inspired many teachers to take on the burden of distance learning to guarantee the completion of the academic year. In the same way, it allowed many to find in the faces and presence of their families the strength to face discomfort and difficulties. In this light, the theme of the meeting can be a powerful reminder for us to descend into the depths of the human heart, suspended by the rope of wonder. How can a person help but feel that original sense of awe in front of the spectacle of a mountain panorama, or listening to music that resonates in the soul, or the simple existence of those who love us and the gift of creation? Wonder is truly the road to recognize the signs of the sublime, of that mystery who is at the root and foundation of all things. In fact, not only does a human heart present itself as a sign, but so does all of reality. In order to question ourselves before the signs, it is necessary to have an extremely human capacity. The first one we have as men and women: wonder. The capacity for wonder, as Giussani calls it. Only wonder knows. This is why Borges could say, emotions all pass, only wonder remains. If we do not cultivate this outlook, we become blind to existence, closing ourselves. We are attracted to ephemeral things and stop asking questions about reality. Even in the desert of the pandemic, we saw the reemergence of questions that were often dormant. What is the meaning of life, of suffering, or of death? Man cannot be satisfied with reduced or partial answers that force him to ignore or forget some aspect of reality. He has within himself a yearning for infiniteness, an infinite sadness and nostalgia that can only be satisfied with an equally infinite answer. Life would be an absurd desire if that answer did not exist. Many people have gone in search of answers, or even just questions about the meaning of life, something we all aspire to find, perhaps without realizing it. The result was something that appeared to be a paradox. Instead of extinguishing our deepest thirst, for many people being confined reawakened the capacity to marvel at people and events that they took for granted before. This dramatic circumstance has restored in us, at least for a while, a more genuine appreciation for life. Without that tangle of distractions and preconceptions that cloud our gaze, blur our view of things, cancel out wonder, and keep us from asking ourselves who we are. In the midst of the public health crisis, the Pope received a letter from a group of artists thanking him for praying for them during a Mass in Casa Santa Marta. After receiving it, he responded, "Artists enable us to understand what beauty is, and the gospel cannot be understood without beauty." Among those who have demonstrated how critical the experience of beauty is for the discovery of truth is theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar, who wrote, "In a world without beauty, the good also loses its attractiveness. The self-evidence of why it must be carried out. Man stands before the good and asks himself why it must be done and not rather its alternative, evil. For this too is a possibility, and even the more exciting one. In a world that no longer has enough confidence in itself to affirm the beautiful, the proofs of the truth have lost their cogency. The logic of these answers is itself a mechanism which no longer captivates anyone. The very conclusions are no longer conclusive. Consequently, the organizing team of the meeting poses a decisive challenge for Christians who are called to witness the deep attractive force of the beauty of faith, the attraction of Jesus, to use an expression that was dear to servant of God Luigi Giussani. The Holy Father expressed this with reference to catechesis in what is commonly believed to be the programmatic document of his pontificate, Evangelii Gaudium. Every expression of true beauty can thus be acknowledged as a path leading to an encounter with the Lord Jesus. If, as St. Augustine says, we love only that which is beautiful, the incarnate Son, as the revelation of infinite beauty, is supremely lovable and draws us to himself with bonds of love. Soul formation in the Via Pulchritudinis ought to be part of our effort to pass on the faith. The Pope, therefore, invites you to continue collaborating with him in witnessing the experience of the beauty of God, who became flesh so that our eyes might be amazed at seeing his face, and our gaze might find in him the wonder of being alive. It is, as Pope St. John Paul II, whose 100th anniversary of birth we recently celebrated, once said, "It is worthwhile being man because you, Jesus, were man." Is not this a stupefying discovery the greatest contribution Christians have to offer to sustain the hope of men and women? It is a task we cannot shirk, especially not in this anguished moment of history. It is the call to shine forth the beauty that has changed our lives, to be concrete witnesses of the love that saves, especially for those who are suffering the most right now. With these sentiments, the Holy Father wholeheartedly imparts his apostolic blessing on Your Excellency and the entire community of the meeting, asking everyone to continue to pray for him. Let me add my own greetings and assure you of my heartfelt respect. Yours devotedly in the Lord, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State. We are also grateful to the President of our Republic, Sergio Mattarella, who also wanted to be here with you during this edition with his message. And now I'm going to read his message. This 41st meeting edition takes place while the terrible pandemic is still causing death and suffering at every latitude and just disrupting our history and forcing us to a slowdown, unfortunately, with heavy economic and social repercussions. And we have to make a new start with greater quality, with greater community awareness, with a new development, more respectful of nature, and overcoming social discriminations. The organizers of the meeting have shown awareness of this in confirming their program of initiatives. These initiatives, once again, are going to enrich the cultural heritage and the opportunities for dialogue for our country, and represent for the many reference communities a very important moment of fraternity and growth. Promoters, voluntary workers, speakers, guests, my most sincere wish is for you. This year's theme, devoid of wonder, we remain deaf to the sublime, was chosen long before the emergence of the virus. Nevertheless, it is a call, a highly appropriate one, to reflect on what happened and also to start making a new start. This new start cannot wait any longer, and at the same time, it needs deep ideals, a large vision, and a lot of pragmatism. In the most critical historic times, of course, material conditions are very important. However, a new start is possible if, next to the legitimate play and game of interest, appears the ability to develop projects to put the focus on the empowerment of growth of people, and also to develop a humankind defeating the drive towards closure, resentment, aversion that would lead to disaster. The meeting, since its origin, has always looked at the European horizon as a decisive element of our future. Understanding the change that the EU made with its response to the pandemic and in designing the New Start is a key requirement today to make a new start for Italy. Our country has showed once again its great civil and moral energies, and only through the European integration and solidarity it can lay the foundations of an appropriate and fair future for its children. We all need to contribute to the resulting economic, social, and cultural commitment. Institutions, first of all, but whole society with its economic forces and its special social autonomies. This is the way to make up for delays and make Italy and the future of its young generation stronger. Sergio Mattarella, President of the Italian Republic. History is made by men, by each one of us, and all that has repercussions on the life of the world. Each one makes an influence on the life of the world, and each one can decide freely what to do, whether taking up the challenges of life in a constructive and creative way, or seek refuge and resignation or a rebellion. That's why the meeting has always decided to meet people that have always taken up their own responsibilities when faced with the challenges of education, social life, economy, and politics. Professor Draghi, you joined the meeting in 2009 as governor of the Bank of Italy when Italy was shocked and disrupted by the deep financial crisis. On that occasion, you underscored that in spite of the many difficulties, it was absolutely needed and urgent to invest, first of all, in education and training. 3 years after that, in July 2012, as president of the European Central Bank, you made an historic decision to save the economy of the Eurozone from a decline that would have caused terrible repercussions for Europe and beyond. This attention of yours for individual growth as primary orientation of politics and economy, your far-sighted European vision, and your courage to intervene without delay when the reality so requires were the most important reasons that were at the basis of our invitation to you. Thank you very much, Professor, for being with us this morning, and the floor goes to you now.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words, Mr. President Schulz. And thank you also to Professor Vittadini and Dr. Forlani for this invitation. Well, in fact, I think there's a number of reasons for being grateful. I was thinking about why there is this gratitude, and I would like to mention one reason. As the President mentioned a moment ago, and as we will see later today, this situation in general, this crisis, this pandemic, has had many consequences. And one of these is uncertainty. Perhaps this is the first thing that comes to mind And this uncertainty paralyzes our activities, our decisions. However, there is one aspect of our personality where this uncertainty has no effect, on which uncertainty has no effect, and that's our ethical commitment. And that's the reason why I'm so thankful for this invitation, because it makes me more participate in your testimony of ethical commitment. An ethical commitment that has not stopped because of uncertainty. Rather, it has strengthened and it is stronger due to the present difficulties. So my presence here today is something that I'm really pleased about. Thank you so much for inviting me. 12 years ago, the financial crisis caused the greatest economic distraction we had ever seen in peacetime. Then, in Europe, there was a second recession and a further loss of employment. The euro crisis then reared its head, followed by the pressing threat of depression and deflation. And yet, we overcame all of this. Just as confidence had returned and economic recovery was starting to take hold, we were hit even harder by the explosion of the pandemic. It is a threat not just to the economy, but also to the social tissue of our society as we have known it so far. It spreads uncertainty, it penalizes employment, and paralyzes consumption and investment. After such a succession of crises, the subsidies being provided are a first form of support to society for those who have been hit hardest, especially those that have tried so often to react. Subsidies are useful to survive, to start again. However, young people need more. Subsidies will end, and if nothing is done, there will be no professional qualifications, there will be a lack of qualifications that will influence their freedom of choice and their future earning potential. And society as a whole cannot accept a world without hope. Rather, gathering all its energy, it must find a common sense and look for the path of reconstruction. In the present circumstances, pragmatism is of the essence. We do not know when a vaccine will be discovered and what the world will look like at that time. Opinions are divided. Some think that everything will return the way it was before. Others see this crisis as the beginning of a period of profound change. Possibly the reality will be somewhere in between. In some sectors, there will not be substantial changes. In others, existing technologies will be rapidly adapted. Still, other sectors will expand and grow as they adjust to new patterns of demand and behaviors produced by the pandemic. But for others, a return to the same levels of activity of business that they had before the pandemic is really unlikely. We must accept the inevitability of change with realism, and at least until a remedy is found, we must adapt our behaviors and our policies. But we must not renounce our principles. Economic policy must not compound the uncertainty already being caused by the pandemic and rapid change. Otherwise, we will end up being controlled by uncertainty instead of us controlling it. We will lose our way. In this respect, the words of the Serenity Prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr come to mind. asking the Lord, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. Today, I'm not going to give you a lecture in economic policy, but I want to convey an ethical message to face together, and this is a term that I will repeat multiple times throughout my presentation, together the challenges posed by reconstruction, and together reaffirm the objectives and values on which we want to build our society, our economy in Italy and in Europe. In the second quarter of 2020, the economy contracted at a rate comparable to that experienced by the main countries during World War II. Our freedom of movement and our own physical, human, psychological interaction have been sacrificed. Entire sectors of our economy have been locked down or put out of business. We have seen a dramatic increase in the numbers of people unable to work. According to the first estimate, it will be difficult to give them again unemployment. And then schools were closed, educational places which stopped, professional and education paths, and this deepened inequalities. The destruction of physical capital that was a feature of war, today many compare also the destruction of human capital unseen since that great conflict. Governments have taken action with extraordinary measures to support employment and income. Tax payments have been suspended or deferred. The banking sector has been mobilized to continue to provide credit to businesses and families. Deficit and public debt have grown to levels previously unseen in peacetime. Leaving aside the national agenda of individual governments, the direction of this common response has been correct. Many rules that were regulating our economies until the beginning of the pandemic have been suspended to give room to pragmatism that could best respond to the changing circumstances. After all, a quote attributed to John Maynard Keynes, the most influential economist of the 20th century, reminds us, when facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? All the available resources have been mobilized to protect workers and businesses that make up the fabric of our economies. And this avoided that the recession could turn into a prolonged depression. But the state of emergency of the measures that it has justified will not last forever. Now it is the time to demonstrate wisdom in choosing the future we want to build. The fact that flexibility and pragmatism are necessary to govern today should not lead us to forget the principles on which we have hitherto relied. The sudden abandonment of any national and international frame of reference generates disorientation. The erosion of certain principles that were considered fundamental until not long ago already started with the financial crisis, the international jurisdiction of the WTO, and with it the framework of multilateralism that had governed international relations since the end of World War II, were called into question by the same countries that had designed it, first and foremost the United States, and those that had benefited most from it, like China. However, this never occurred in the case of Europe. And that's not by chance, because Europe has its own social protection system that over the last few years had mitigated, probably in an insufficient way, but better than many other places in the world, had mitigated some of the most severe and unjust consequences of globalization. And then We have also seen the impossibility to reach a global climate agreement with the relevant consequences on global warming. And in Europe, we saw criticism of the European construct, along with growing skepticism, especially after the euro area sovereign debt crisis, and also towards some of the rules that had been considered essential for its functioning, the functioning of Europe and of the euro. These rules were the Stability Pact, but also the single market, the competition, and state aid. All of these rules subsequently were suspended or relaxed following the pandemic emergency. The inadequacy of some of these arrangements had long since become evident. But instead of working quickly to correct them, something that was done partially only for the financial sector, probably because of inertia, timidity, and vested interests, this policy basically entered the populist message and was used as a criticism against the existing order, a protest against the existing order. This uncertainty is not unusual. It is typical of the way towards new organizations and new orders, and this was amplified by the pandemic. Social distancing is a necessity and a collective responsibility, but it is fundamentally unnatural for our societies that thrive on exchange, interpersonal communication, and sharing. As I said, we don't really know when a vaccine will be found and when we will be able to return to more normal relations. Basically, all this is profoundly unsettling. Now we have to think about reforming the existing without abandoning the principles that have guided us in the past. We must reaffirm our adhesion to Europe and its rules of responsibility, but also common interdependence and solidarity. Multilateralism with the adhesion to a global rule of law. The future is not without reference points. As was the case in the past, consider the 70s in the last century. Well, they were, in fact, the last period of great instability. As regards Italy and other countries had similar experiences, inflation went from 5% in the 70s to 21% at the end of those years, and unemployment from 7%, and the lira, the Italian currency, lost half of its value, but this Italian experience was similar to many other countries' experiences, and it is the effect of periods that for some reasons had no reference points. In those years there was increase in oil price, and then many international organizations were stopped, and there were the war on the Yom Kippur. So there were really significant events that basically made those principles look obsolete and that should have been overcome. And this has led to erratic policies and not so efficient policies, lower internal security and greater unemployment. However, this is not the future. The future is in a profound reform of the existing reality, and it has to be done now. We can take inspiration from those who were involved in rebuilding the world, Europe and Italy after World War II. Think, for example, of those leaders who, inspired by John Maynard Keynes, met in Bretton Woods in 1944 to create the International Monetary Fund, or think of Alcide de Gasperi, who in 1943 set out his vision for a future Italian democracy, and to many, many others in Italy, Europe, and across the world who were thinking about and preparing for the period after the war. Their reflections on the future began well before the war ended and produced, in its fundamental principles, the European order as we know it. It is likely that our European rules will not be reactivated for a long time, and when they will, certainly they won't be in their current form. So our search for a new sense of direction requires reflection, and this reflection must start immediately. Indeed, precisely because economic policy today is more pragmatic and their leaders can exercise more discretion, we need to be very clear about the objectives that we set ourselves. The reconstruction of this framework in which long-term objectives are intimately connected with short-term ones is essential to restore certainty to households and businesses, but it will inevitably be accompanied by stocks of debt that will be high for a long time. This debt is undersigned by countries, institutions, markets, savers, and this debt will be sustainable, that is, it will continue to be bought only if it is used for productive purposes, for example, investments in human capital, in crucial infrastructure for production, in research, and also for other purposes. That is, this is what we perceive as good debt. Its sustainability will be undermined if instead it will be used for unproductive purposes, that is, if it will be considered a bad debt. Low interest rates are not in themselves a guarantee of sustainability. The perception of the quality of the debt incurred is just as important. And the more that perception deteriorates, the more uncertain our framework of reference will become, with effects on employment, investment, and consumption. The return to growth, growth that is respectful of the environment and does not demean the individual, has become an absolute imperative. The economic policies today must be sustainable, and growth is another condition of sustainability of our debt. To provide income security, especially for the poorest, to strengthen social cohesion made fragile by the experience of the pandemic and the difficulties that exiting the recession will create in the months to come, and to build a future whose contours are already visible to our societies today. This objective is challenging, but it is not unattainable if we succeed in dispelling the uncertainty hanging over our countries today. We are now seeing economic activity bounce back as our economies reopen. There will be a recovery from the collapse of international trade with internal consumption. Consider that savings in the euro area reached 17%, up from 13% from last year. There can be a recovery in private investment of GDP that in the second quarter of 2020 in some countries return to the levels of the mid-90s, but a real recovery of consumption and investment will be possible only with the distraction of the uncertainty that we see today, and with economic policies that can be efficient in providing support to families and businesses and credible at one time, because they are sustainable in the long run. The return to growth and the sustainability of economic policies are essential to respond to the changing preferences of our societies, starting with the health system. where efficiency is now measured in terms of our state of readiness for mass disasters on the scale we just experienced. The protection of the environment, adaptation of our industries and lifestyles is considered by 75% of people in 16 major countries to be the priority for governments. In other words, number one, people want to have responses concerning the environment and climate change, and the response to what can be considered the greatest health disaster of our time. And it is also an environmental disaster in a way. Digitalization has been imposed by the change in our working patterns and accelerated by the pandemic, and this is destined to remain a permanent feature of our societies. Consider that in the United States, it is estimated that a permanent shift from a home and an office is equal to a fifth of office days. However, there is a sector which is critical for growth and therefore for all the transformation I have just listed, and where a long-term vision must go hand in hand with immediate action. This is education and, more generally, investment in young people. This has always been true, but the current situation makes a massive investment of intellectual and financial resources in this area all the more urgent. Active participation in the society of the future will require today's youth to have even greater capacity for discernment and adaptation. If we look at the cultures and the nations that have best managed uncertainty and the need for change, they have all awarded education a fundamental role in preparing young people to manage change and uncertainty in their life on the basis of wisdom and also on the basis of independence of judgment. But there is also a moral imperative to make this choice now and to make it well. The debt created by the pandemic is unprecedented and will have to be repaired mainly by those who are young today. It is our duty to equip them with the means to service that debt and to do so while living in improved societies. For years, a form of collective selfishness has led governments to divert attention and resources towards initiatives that generated guaranteed and immediate political returns. This is no longer acceptable today. Depriving a young person of his or her own future is one of the biggest forms of inequality. Thank you. A few days before ending my term as president of the European Central Bank last year, I had the privilege of addressing students and faculty at the Università Cattolica in Milan. The purpose of my address on that occasion was try to describe what I consider to be the three indispensable qualities for those in positions of power. Knowledge, so that decisions must be based on facts and not just on convictions. Courage, that is required to make decisions, especially when not all their consequences are known with certainty, because inaction itself has consequences and does not exempt decision makers from responsibility. And finally, humility. Humility to understand that the power entrusted to our policymakers should not be used arbitrarily, but to achieve the objectives that the legislator has assigned them within a specific mandate. I was reflecting then on the lessons learned over the course of my own career. I could have not imagined how quickly and how tragically, our leaders would be called upon to demonstrate those qualities. Today's situation, however, requires an additional form, a special form of commitment. As I have already underlined, the emergency requires more discretion on the part of governments than in ordinary times. So there should also be greater transparency in their actions and more consistency with the mandate they received and with the principles that inspired it. Constructing the future with foundations not built on sand must involve all of us in the society, which must recognize itself in the choices made so that they cannot be reversed later. Transparency and sharing have always been essential for the credibility of government action, and they are all the more fundamental today because of the discretion that characterizes our current state of emergency. This comes with choices that will have effects in the years to come. This need for collective affirmation of the values that hold us together and this common vision of the future that we want to build must be found at a national level but also at a European level. The pandemic, as I said before, has severely tested social cohesion at a global level and resurrected tensions even between European countries. From this crisis, Europe can be stronger. The action of governments is based on a surface that is stable thanks to monetary policy, and the EU Next Generation Fund enriches the European policy arsenal. The recognition of the role that a European budget can play in stabilizing our economies and the issuing of common debt are important and can become the basis, the beginning of a design that will lead to a common treasury ministry with a function to provide stability to the euro area, and this function has been confirmed since a long time ago. After the prevailing of the will of the government with the intergovernmental method, the European Commission has got back to the center of action. In the future, we hope that the decision-making process will be less difficult and reflect the conviction felt by most people of the need for a strong and stable Europe, especially in a world that seems to doubt that the system of international relations that has given us the longest period of peace in our history. But we must not forget the circumstances that are the beginning of this step forward for Europe. Solidarity should have been spontaneous. Instead, it was the fruit of negotiations. Nor should we forget that the strong and stable Europe we all want, responsibility comes with and gives legitimacy to solidarity. So this step forward will have to be cemented and will be there, will have to be cemented by the credibility of economic policies, both at a European level, but also and especially so at a national level. Only if this takes place, then we can't say that the changes brought about the pandemic in the European order are temporary, as some people said. We will be able to consider the reconstruction of the European economies truly as an undertaking shared by all Europeans and as an opportunity to design a common future, as we have done so many times in the past. It is in the nature of the European project to evolve gradually and predictably with the creation of new rules and new institutions. The introduction of the euro followed logically from the creation of the single market, and then a shared fiscal rules, the development first of shared fiscal rules, and later the banking union were necessary consequences, having a single currency, the creation of a European budget, which is the natural direction of the evolution of our institutional architecture, will one day correct the gap which still exists. This is a time of uncertainty and anxiety, but it is also a time of reflection and common action. The road ahead can surely be found, and we're not alone in our effort to find it. Once again, we need to support young people by investing in their education and training. Only then, with the clear conscience of those who have fulfilled their own responsibilities, we will be able to say, in particular to the youngest in society, that the best way to find your direction in the present is to design your future. Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie Presidente. Grazie.
Thank you.
Grazie,
Thank you very much, Professor Draghi, for such important words, for the content and meaningfulness, and we really feel encouraged to work together, to always look for the dialogue, and to be at the service of our young generation's future. And there's great attention for our future generations' future is going to be a key topic during this week. We're going to talk a lot about training, education, economy, politics. We really want this meeting edition to be a place where future is discussed and faced with great courage, as you said and witnessed, and how you also encouraged us to do. So your observations and remarks during this opening session are certainly going to be discussed with the major stakeholders of the social, political, and economic world. Thank you very much for being with us, and we really look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, once again. Allow me now to invite you to join the official opening of the exhibition Bethlehem Reborn on the Nativity of Bethlehem Basilica, and we're going to have the ambassador of the State of Palestine in Italy. And thank you very much to all of you for being with us here in presence and online. Have a great meeting. Maybe geographically we're going to be far away, but humanly we're going to be extremely close to each other. Thank you very much indeed.
I gentili ospiti sono pregati di uscire, evitando assembramenti.
In Eni oggi coltiviamo delle microalghe che catturano anidride carbonica, ma non basta. Abbiamo bisogno di Lorenzo, che riutilizza gli oggetti per creare qualcosa di nuovo. Eni più Lorenzo è meglio di Eni. Insieme abbiamo un'altra energia. In Eni oggi coltiviamo delle microalghe che catturano anidride carbonica, ma non basta. Abbiamo bisogno di Lorenzo, che riutilizza gli oggetti per creare qualcosa di nuovo. Eni più Lorenzo è meglio di Eni. Insieme abbiamo un'altra energia.